Imagine this. It is the winter of 1777. The American Revolution is hanging by a thread. At Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, the Continental Army is not ready to win a war. It is barely ready to survive one. Thousands of men are trapped in the snow. They are hungry, they are shivering, they are sick. Every day more soldiers fall to disease, exposure and exhaustion. The camps are messy, the training is poor, the men can hardly march together, let alone fight the world's most powerful army. And just a few miles away in Philadelphia, the British are warm, organised and confident. They have discipline, they have experience, they have everything the Americans do not. George Washington understands the danger. If the army does not change fast, the revolution may die right here in the winter mud of Valley Forge. What Washington did not know was that the man who had helped save this army was already on the other side of the Atlantic. And the strange thing was this: almost everything people thought they knew about him was false. Friedrich Wilhelm von Steuben was born in 1730 in Magdeburg, Prussia, into a military world. His father served in the Prussian Engineering Corps, and from early childhood, Steuben grew up around soldiers, drill, cannon fire, and iron discipline. He was not raised for comfort, he was raised for war. As a teenager, he watched military operations up close. By the time he became a young man, he'd entered the Prussian army himself. Then, during the 7 Years' War, he served in the field and learned the hard lessons of military life. He studied drill, organisation, command structure, and the unforgiving mechanics of disciplined warfare. He was good at the job, very good. But when the war ended, the army shrank, and Steuben suddenly found himself with no real place in the world. For years he drifted through Europe looking for work. He took court appointments, he chased military opportunities, he tried to attach himself to powerful patrons. Nothing lasted, nothing paid enough. He was a trained soldier in a time when soldiers were no longer in demand. By the 1770s, Steuben was older, broke, and running out of options. Then France entered the story. In Paris, he met people connected to the American cause. The colonies were fighting Britain, and the Americans were desperate for help. They needed officers, trainers, organisers, someone who could turn raw volunteers into a real army. At first, Steuben did not make the impression he hoped for. Benjamin Franklin and the other American diplomats in Paris had already met too many European officers with big ambitions and little value. They were tired of men arriving with fancy titles and expensive demands. So when Steuben presented himself, the Americans were cautious, and they had every reason to be. Then came the deception. With help from French officials and American diplomats, Steuben was presented in a way that made him sound far more important than he really was. His rank was exaggerated. His connection to Frederick the Great was polished into something much grander. He was described as the sort of officer Congress would notice immediately. That was not accidental. A former Prussian captain would not turn heads. A high-ranking general trained in the Prussian system? That was different. The story worked. Steuben was accepted. He even agreed to serve without pay, asking only that he be compensated later if America won the war. So in late 1777 he crossed the Atlantic and made his way to America. He landed with assistants, letters, and the carefully crafted image of a brilliant European military man. When he finally arrived at Valley Forge in February 1778, he met George Washington. Picture that scene. Washington riding through a frozen camp filled with weak, starving men. Log huts, ragged coats, bare feet in the snow, and then Steuben appears tall, imposing, loud, and fully dressed like a professional officer. He looked like someone who belonged in command, and Washington knew it. Within days, Steuben was given the chance to inspect the entire army. What he found was chaos. There was no standard drill. Different regiments trained in different ways. Some soldiers did not know how to form lines properly. Many could not reload quickly. Camp sanitation was terrible. The army was not just weak, it was disorganized from top to bottom. One of the most shocking things to Steuben was the bayonet. In Prussian service, the bayonet was a weapon of fear and precision. At Valley Forge, many American soldiers barely understood it at all. They had used it for everything except battle. That was the moment Steuben went to work. He created a model company of roughly 100 men and began training them himself. Not from a distance. Not through endless paperwork. He stood in the cold. He walked the line. He corrected posture, footing, grip, and timing with his own hands. Every morning, before the rest of the camp was fully awake, Steuben was already on the drill ground. He showed the men how to stand, how to move, how to turn, how to fire, and how to reload with speed. He drilled them in lines, columns, wheel movements, and bayonet technique until the motions became automatic. This was more than training, it was transformation. And Steuben understood something many European officers did not. The American soldier was not a mercenary. He was not fighting for a king or a paycheck. He was fighting for an idea that mattered. It meant discipline could be built without cruelty, and loyalty could grow from respect. There was only one problem. Steuben barely spoke English, so his instructions were written in French, translated into English each night, and then taught to the troops the next morning. When things went wrong, he cursed in German, then French, then demanded help in English. The men found it hilarious, and somehow it made him even more memorable. He did not just train soldiers, he built confidence, and he did something even more important. He trained the trainers. Once the model company had learned the system, those men returned to their own units and passed the instruction on. That meant Steuben's method spread through the army like a chain reaction. Within months, the change was impossible to ignore. Soldiers who had once been exhausted and confused were now marching with discipline. They loaded faster. They formed properly. They handled bayonets with confidence. The army had begun to look like a real army. Steuben also changed the camp itself. He improved sanitation. He reorganized the layout of the encampment. He pushed for cleaner procedures and better responsibility among officers and sergeants. He was not only teaching drill, he was building structure. That may have been his greatest contribution of all. When the Continental Army finally left Valley Forge, it was no longer the same force that had entered it. At Monmouth, they stood up to the British in a way they could not have done 6 months earlier. They held formation. They fought back. They did not collapse under pressure. The result was not just a battle. It was proof. The Americans could now fight like soldiers. Later, Steuben's training would pay off again and again. At Stony Point, American troops launched a night assault with bayonets and stormed a British position in one of the boldest attacks of the war. The weapon that had once been treated like a cooking tool was now part of a professional fighting system. And then came Steuben's most lasting legacy. He wrote a military manual for the new American Army, a blueprint for drill, discipline, camp order, and battlefield behavior. That book became the standard for generations. It shaped the structure of the army long after the revolution was over. In a strange way, the fake general had written the real foundation of American military discipline. After the war, Steuben remained in America. He was honored. He was admired. But like many wartime heroes, he struggled in peace. Money was inconsistent. Recognition came slowly. The man who had helped save the army spent his later years with far less comfort than his service had earned. When he died in 1794, he left behind no children, no dynasty, and no great fortune. But he left something more important. He left a system. He left discipline. He left a model for what the American army could become, and that is why Friedrich von Steuben still matters. Yes, his rank was exaggerated. Yes, his story was dressed up. Yes, he was sold to Congress as something he was not. But the work was real. The training was real. The results were real. He took a starving, scattered army and turned it into a force that could stand and fight. Friedrich von Steuben was a man built on a lie. But the army he forged was no illusion. If you found this story surprising, subscribe for more Untold History. And tell me this, what is the most successful lie that history ever turned into a legend?